Happy Monday. Happy St. Patrick's Day, actually, to all of our viewers out there. And welcome into our latest Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Hope you guys are all having a very green Monday. Lots to get into, including news from last week. I just got back from Florida where I saw Anthony in person. I hope you all like that dispensary podcast we did last week. Great setup that Brady Cobbs got set up there. What a story he's got going on. But first thing we want to address is what's going on with this whole high tide SNDL fiasco right now. We're going to get some analysis from both of us, including Anthony's take on what this announcement means. And could this be a takeover? Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but we'll dive into it and what this really means for both companies moving forward. As well, Peter Sack from Chicago Atlantic is going to come in real quick, talk about their latest earnings and news involving Pharmacann and IIPR, where Pharmacann has defaulted in 9 of 11 leases in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and New York. What should investors be paying attention to with this trend for the overall industry? So lots to get into as we're off to a red hot week here in cannabis so far. So let's welcome in AV. Good to see you on a Monday. How are things?
How's it going? Good. Good. It was nice change of pace last week. Good to see you in person.
I know.
Thought that podcast was actually pretty damn good that we did in Sunburn. It was nice to get the in-person feel. Brady pissed off a lot of people in the Florida cannabis market with his kind of open candor about the hemp situation in Florida and some of his reservations about certain facets of the industry. He was correct in his assumptions, but there's a lot of people in the Florida trees community and in the hemp industry in Florida that I guess he's rubbed the wrong way, but it's got a hell of a cannabis company. So and he's open to debate any of those people in a public forum. So it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Well, what I love about having him on is that he just speaks the honest truth, and that's what you want. And, whether you like it or hate it, he's got some fair points, but one thing's for sure. He's got one heck of a story he's building out down there in Florida. What a dispensary that is set up there. Great location. The way he's designed it, a lot of lifestyle, a lot of great stories he was telling us about just being down on the A1A there at the elbow room, I should say. Man, that place is that was a zoo down there, but tons of people down there. I saw, it is a zoo. And a lot of, if you haven't been, you got to check that out if you go down to Fort Lauderdale, but that is a melting pot, that's for sure. But a lot of his crew actually was down there filming some content with some of the swag. But as he was saying, even police officers were asking for hats, but he's got a great story. I'm like, listen, there's lots you can brand around a lifestyle in Florida, right?
Yeah, a lot. And this isn't a knock on anybody else, because I know we've got a lot of friends in the Florida MMTC leadership, but there's not really a Florida cannabis brand. Obviously, when you think about cannabis in Florida, TruLeaf is the 800-pound gorilla. TruLeaf services the most patients in the state.
Yep.
It's a brand, but it's not a lifestyle. Sunburn is a brand. Sunburn's a lifestyle. Sunburn is one of the only logos in cannabis companies that I'll wear, whether it's a T-shirt or a hat. It's Florida cannabis.
Yeah,
it's got that Florida vibe. It's a Florida company. It's more of a lifestyle versus a cannabis brand.
And to Rainy UK's point, the story about his dad was cool. That's really cool. It's whenever I tell that story to people that don't follow the industry, they're like, what? But yeah, that's the reality. But that's pretty unique to say the least. Tony says, let's go SNDL. So with that, let's welcome into the wire. We haven't done one of these in a while, but here we are. And big news, obviously, last week, but got involving where they disclosed basically in their filing, they own 5.4% of High Tide's common outstanding shares. At first glance, it's unclear whether this is a financial play at the first steps, or is this something bigger as to what Zach, has planned? He's pretty savvy, as we know in the past. He's been very, very aggressive in the M&A space. But from your perspective, what do you think this move says about SNDL's strategy?
Yeah, so Jerry from Bengal Capital actually set the record straight. They filed a 13G, which is a short form signifying you're a passive investor at this current point in time. So obviously there's no true intent there. In the public eye, granted, they can easily file a 13D, which is a much longer form disclosure that does have to actually be spelled out what your intent is with purchasing the stock. Zach is very shrewd with his capital. Zach has done this with stalking horse bids on Indiva. He's done this with accumulating shares in Valens. And he also wrestled Nova into submission. Zach's the closest thing to probably a corporate raider in the cannabis industry. I always enjoy talking to him. I kind of like the way that he does business and the way that he conducts himself around the SNDL company. It's interesting. I don't know too much about, and I'm not going to pretend that I know too much about Canadian antitrust laws and how the synergies would work. But I think that they would have a quote unquote monopoly on Canadian cannabis retail. And I don't know how the quotas work provincially. So I don't think that it would be as easy of an integration as people think, or if it makes complete sense. Zach might just see that Hitty, which I do actually own shares of, is grossly undervalued, and he sees value in owning the paper, and he sees it as a prudent use of his capital right now, which he's been known to do. I think it's kind of a nothing burger until he says otherwise, which if he does have intent on taking over the company or accumulating more paper, he's going to have to publicly disclose that at a certain point in time.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, they are being transparent. They're following everything by the books right now. But, you got to ask yourself, whether this is a nothing burger right now. What's this say about both companies? Because we've seen time and time again with High Tide from an execution standpoint on the retail level, they're doing a phenomenal job. But on the other hand, you have SNDL with a war chest of cash. So clearly it shows from an execution retail front that High Tide is the leader and will probably maintain the leader, which is grabbing interest from SNDL. But at the end of the day, what's this say right now, what you think, where both companies sit and stand?
Maybe Zach is short on options to deploy capital right now. Granted, I'm kind of just speculating here, but also I guess Raj has built a pretty valuable enterprise with Canna Cabana and with High Tide that he either sees as a accretive acquisition long-term, something he wants to take over, or like I said, it's prudent use of his capital. He sees that the stock is greatly depressed and he's just been buying it, which would also make sense. Granted, also fundamentally, it's a much different business than SNDL. SNDL is more of a vertical operation, especially with Valens and other facets of the business. Raj is pure play discount cannabis retail.
Yeah, Tony, SNDL is a behemoth. Yes, we know we got a strong following here. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen here. Do you think this really could be a takeover? I don't want to speculate. I don't even want to go there because, you know what, I don't know enough information right now. But one thing's for sure, time and time again, we hear even guys like Seth Yakutin that talk about Zach a lot. He's a guy that does things a little bit differently in the space, but all for the right reasons. He is a savvy businessman, is he not?
He is, but it could be a takeover. But at the same time, I think SNDL is valued 2-1 right now as it relates to High Tide. High Tide their stock has gotten beat up. You could argue that it's grossly undervalued. Zach would have to come in at a high premium to take out the business, and then you'd have to figure out the integration and how you could actually amalgamate the entire thing. It might not make sense at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I know, look, we've talked about this before as far as M&A. We're not going to see consolidation a lot right off the bat because a lot of the debt issues in the U.S. right now. But this definitely grabbed a lot of people's attention, to say the least. I couldn't help but think Chronos. Here they are with, what is it? How much money do they have? 850 some million?
About 850 million.
So and they've done nothing with this cash for a number of years. And you have to ask yourself, is this something where they could get into the actual game and start looking at things differently? Because that's a lot of cash they've got.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see the management at Chronos go and buy a Canadian LP or buy Canadian retail. I think they're going to sit there and wait and strategically wait until there's distressed assets in the United States and then start to toe in from some sort of branding and some sort of roll-up standpoint. They've got a hell of a lot of money, and there will be assets sooner or later in the next couple of years that they could purchase, or they just sit on it and keep clipping the 5 or 6%. I'm assuming they're getting in their money market or their T-bills with all that cash that they're sitting on. It's absurd how much money they have.
Yeah. Jordan Wyatt, good to see you. I know we got a little contested on YouTube over the weekend, but hey, it's always good to have some good dialogue. He writes, not likely to be a takeover, in my opinion. Worst case scenario, we make some profit off their stock and perhaps convince them to work together more. SNDL could sell more through High Tide, perhaps white label.
Yeah, I think he's correct. I like I said, I mean, I don't know anything about Canadian antitrust, but I think they'd have something like close to 400 retail locations. between the two of them. I don't know how that would make sense or if that is even allowed in certain provinces, because I think Ontario, one person or one entity can only have 25%, up to 25% of the total retail locations. And I think between the Value Buds and the rest of the dispensaries in SNDL paired with the Canna Cabana assets, they would have more than that in Ontario.
Peaceful relaxation. We've actually reached out to the Canopy team. We're going to have a lot of content with them coming up. We're going to be working with them closely again. Expect to have Luke on, as I said a couple of podcasts ago. He's going to be coming on in April, but from understanding is like, look, he's been head down, getting his head wrapped around on the overall day-to-day operations. They wanted to make sure that the timing is right. So that's kind of the word and feedback that we got. So next month in April, we should be having Luke on more. Captain JT Kirk writes, they say in Canada, the rights of shareholders with a 5% ownership interest can include the requisition of meetings and nominating directors. Okay. So yeah. Interesting. All right, let's move now. The latest numbers out of Ohio, they reached actually over 77 million, 77.8 million, nearly matching the daily averages from August. I know a couple of weeks ago I had Kim Rivers on, and I asked her with some of the declining revenue and prices over the last 2 months, or I should say a few months, is she concerned at all with Ohio? And she said, relax, take a deep breath. Everything will get figured out in due time. These numbers are trending on par with what we saw the first month when adult use went live last August. So it appears that she knows what she's talking about, because the latest numbers are showcasing that.
Yeah, I mean, it was the highest priced market in the country in August of last year when it came online. We've seen some price compression, but this is also indicative of the fact that you're seeing volume pick up in terms of consumers' buying patterns. There's a 25% decrease in the price per gram from where we are today versus August of 2024. Meanwhile, the total revenue, which I think is averaging about 2.7 million per day, is in parity of where it was in August. It's a good sign for the market. Obviously, price coming down, price compression, everybody gets scared, but that price was going to stabilize somewhere sooner or later. It was not going to stay where it was on inception. So the fact that revenue is back in parity from where it was for opening of the market, and they have more rules and regulations coming online here shortly to be a true adult use market. Ohio's looking attractive.
Okay. Is my signal on my end, is it glitchy? Am I good?
A little bit.
Is it? Yeah, I'm noticing I'm a little. Sorry about that for everybody watching this right now. I might need to restart. You might go solo here for a second if things don't improve here. But
you're not
anyway,
that bad.
good to
You're
see
not that
you.
bad. I can hear you. I can hear you completely.
Raging Gun writes, Tilray is the Rick Ross of cannabis. Glitchy, is it? Okay, Raging Gun. All right. Tell you what. I'm going to bring in Peter Sack here in just a moment. Do you want to maybe handle him right off the top here, and then I'll shut down and come right back if that works for you? Just so it's this getting pretty glitchy on my end. If that works for you, can you do that?
Sure. Bring him in.
We're pivoting here in real time here, folks, but bear with me here. Oh, Drew writes, you're fine. My feed is fine. All right, I'll just stick here and just, hopefully it works itself out. On that note, let's bring in Peter Sack. He's the managing partner of Chicago Atlantic. Good to see you again. How are things?
Hey guys, life is good. Good to see you too.
Good to see you. I know you had some earnings reports, but before we get into your numbers, what do you think? What's the big takeaway this earnings season and what you've seen? And, for investors watching this as a whole, what's your big takeaway right now from what you've seen?
I think a lot of hunkering down, focusing on operations, much more measured CapEx spend in the historicals, and I think in considerations for 2025, and a lot of cash flow driven by not paying taxes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I know that's something to keep an eye on. We talked about that a lot. But let's get into some of your earnings where you demonstrated strong performance again. Total loan principal outstanding of $410.2 million across 30 portfolio companies and a portfolio weighted average yield to maturity of 17.2%. These figures highlight, I think, some disciplined underwriting again and efficient capital allocation. So walk us through, I guess, some of the key drivers behind all this, because this was a welcome news, I think, for a lot of your shareholders.
We deployed more than $90 million in Q4 alone out of this one vehicle. across a diversity of borrowers and a broad geographic footprint. And that's coming off the heels of raising a really attractively priced unsecured note from a series of mutual fund investors in Q4. And so, we're really excited about the quarter because we did what we said we were going to do and not much more.
Right.
We raised capital and we deployed it. And that's our job. We continue to have success in portfolio management across that portfolio, and we want to deliver a really boring investment vehicle that has a really attractive risk-adjusted return.
Boring's good in cannabis, right? Go ahead, Anthony.
Boring's very good. I was going to say, Peter, you kind of brought up two of my points that I was going to ask you about off the top: unpaid taxes and then CapEx spending. As it relates to CapEx spending, we've seen a lot of the majors lighten it up as far as the forecast goes for 2025. How does that affect your business, if any, at all, with them spending incremental CapEx?
It means that going into 2025, our financing opportunities are not driven by industry macro trends so much as they are by idiosyncratic developments of specific operators doing a specific thing.
Okay.
The macro trends within the industry are growth in Ohio, continued consolidation and growth in Missouri, Minnesota's adult use program launching and beginning, continued development in New York, continued development of social equity licenses in Maryland. But none of those, with perhaps the exception of Ohio, are giant trends that you'll see Trulieve, Curaleaf, Verano, GTI allocating $200 million to support.
Okay.
And so that means in that environment, we're focused on really grassroots relationships of one dispensary operator who's got 10 dispensaries buying 5 more.
Okay.
A cultivator expanding their cultivation facility to add 3 more dry rooms. These are small loans, really attractive risk reward.
Yeah.
And they're originated not because we read MJ Biz Daily. They're originated because we've been talking to these small operators and being in front of them in the markets that we like consistently for the last 4 years. And now when they have a growth project that they want to take advantage of, we're there and ready to prove what we can do.
Yeah.
Okay. And then as it relates to unpaid taxes, it's a huge, I don't even want to call it a cloud. It's just a conversation point right now in the industry. When you're underwriting on the front end, are you sitting down with your tenants and potential borrowers and addressing these things on the front end? Are there any sort of covenants that you put into your agreements, like, guys, you have to be paying your taxes because this is a big liability that starts to accrue on the balance sheet, and it can deteriorate the credit strength of the tenants and imply a certain amount of risk moving forward?
Absolutely. And we view it as another form of indebtedness. And just like we limit and put caps on unsecured indebtedness, other forms of secured indebtedness, this is another form of indebtedness that we need to put a cap on and factor that into the entire underwriting of the company. From a fundamental standpoint, if the company is very underlevered elsewhere, having some unpaid tax liability isn't necessarily a huge problem. And so it's more about factoring it into the broader risk consideration of the underwrite and of cash flow and servicing expectations going forward. And then keeping those guardrails in place in the form of something like a fixed charge coverage ratio that includes taxes as they're accrued, not necessarily when they're paid. A total leverage ratio that includes unpaid taxes in the definition of leverage and indebtedness. And so these are ways that you can get comfortable with the idea. I know it sounds crazy that a company isn't paying its taxes.
Okay. Yeah, but it's a great way to mitigate it at the same time and keep them in check.
Exactly. And it's a mix of being a commercial and reasonable partner to your borrowers while also tightly controlling risk.
Yeah. Well, deploying 90 million in a quarter, I guess, in this day and age, I think that grabbed a lot of people by, I guess, a little bit of a surprise. But when you look at, emerging trends in borrower behavior and capital needs, what I guess are you seeing pertaining to that investors maybe should be paying attention to?
In terms of deployment trends?
Yeah.
I think the focus should be on the focus for us, at least, is less on the giant names and it's on individual idiosyncratic operators and
Right.
idiosyncratic markets. And cannabis is still a place where the market is still extremely fragmented, even though the few public companies get most of the press. And so that's why I love seeing that you guys bring on someone like Brady at Sundial, like great example of an operator that's differentiating himself in a market.
Yeah.
But it's those types of profile of operators that underlie where we spend most of our time.
Sorry, were you going to say something, Anthony?
I was going to. I thought you were going to ask a follow-up question, Chad.
No, I was just going to say there's a lot of the story of cannabis that's untold, right? And we see stuff and we meet with people like Brady. It's just, what are you seeing, I guess, as a whole right now? That there's just a lot of the story in the cannabis side that it's really not really known, because when you're right, when you look at some of the popular names, let's face it, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's like doom and gloom right now. But what are you seeing that maybe the average investor should be aware of that they may not be aware of right now?
I think the Journal came out with an article this week on the Missouri market. You don't see the Wall Street Journal covering cannabis that often.
No.
And that's a market where I don't think any of the large where the large MSOs do not have a strong footprint in any large way. And so like that's an example of a market that just doesn't get a lot of attention amongst the public companies, but has been an extremely attractive one.
Yeah, we've actually highlighted a few times with Seth, Anthony.
Yeah, we have. And then Peter, you mentioned that the financing that you did in the quarter, I think there was the 50 million facility. There was a couple of mutual fund investors that came in there. Are you gaining more interest right now or getting more increased interest from institutional investors, from mutual fund investors that are starting to circle up and take this seriously, especially looking at, let's say, depressed valuations, as well as maybe the potential for something on the reform front here in the next couple of years?
Incrementally, yes, but it is relationship by relationship. And you come to it's not the performance of the equities that are driving them. Okay. It's finding idiosyncratic, really attractive opportunities to bring someone into the cannabis industry.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is what we do every day. This is about lauding, regardless of what's going on in the equity markets, lauding the fundamentals of the cannabis market, of lauding the fundamentals of its growth potential, lauding the fundamental execution that operators in the space are doing, and then finding innovative investment mechanisms through which people can enter the market.
Yeah.
And that's what our public debt funds do. That's what our private debt funds do, is finding pathways that, even in light of an incredibly underperforming equities index, finding ways to create attractive risk-adjusted returns in this space.
Yeah.
And then one of the topics that we can't get away from is hemp. Are you evaluating opportunities, or does the mandates within REFI even allow you to, let's say, invest in infrastructure within the hemp industry, or is that risk profile too high right now as it relates to, let's say, impending or potential impending regulatory reform and just the ambiguity around the Farm Bill?
Our mandate doesn't prohibit us. I think we have yet to find an avenue or investment that sufficiently mitigates those risks, particularly since we're debt focused, and debt means we need to create that downside protection. And I think there are some really strong equity opportunities in that space, given the growth potential that offsets the potential downside risk. But from a debt perspective, it can be hard to mitigate that. I'm really enthusiastic about the hemp beverage market.
Yes.
Largely because I see it as increasing the market and increasing the pie. That the people that hemp beverages have never been a particularly strong share of dispensary sales in the regulated market. And the people that are buying in Total Wine and other liquor stores and convenience stores are people that are not going into dispensaries to buy drinks.
We need a new audience, that's for sure, to expand. And I think it's welcoming news.
100% correct to that assumption. I was saying it months ago. Boris going with the select beverages, a bunch of the other MSOs going after the beverage market. They just jailbroke their brand out of the dispensary and onto the shelf of Total Wine. It's got mass market appeal, and that's why it's attractive.
Yeah.
That category in of itself, I hope stays and doesn't get grouped in with the synthetics and other facets of that industry. What's exciting you in 2025? I mean, I know you brought up Missouri. I know that Missouri has been a very good market for some time now. Where are you seeing growth, or are there any markets that you're currently evaluating as far as assets go that are looking exciting for this year?
I think that some of the markets that have been really battered from a wholesale price compression standpoint are starting to see some improvements.
Okay.
13-week, I'm looking at my dashboard of 13-week wholesale price changes across 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, across a dozen states. And over the last 13-week, wholesale prices have grown in Oregon, Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Maine, Delaware, what we expect, and Illinois. But that's extremely encouraging.
Yeah.
And I use cannabis benchmarks as my as my reference, and I think those are really important data points about how even some of the legacy markets are starting to reverse some of the trends that have soured commentary on the space.
Yeah, I think that's for sure.
Okay.
A lot of fixation on Florida leading up to that election. I think people still haven't gotten over that, but it's good, obviously, to look abroad. But those are some great points. I did want to ask you too, and it's a big topic right now. Shifting gears, it's making headlines. We talk about some of these names. Pharmacann, they recently defaulted in 9 of its 11 leases with IIPR in Illinois, Pennsylvania, and New York. So, what's your take on what's happening here?
I think the large capital leases are a challenging piece of many capital structures.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, they're a long-term fixed liability against an asset whose profitability and cash flows will change and will be volatile. Wholesale prices go up and down, markets change. And so I think it is somewhat an inevitable result of that mismatch of fixed long-term liability and an asset that is long-term but has a lot of volatility in terms of their performance.
Yeah.
And, but it's also a great indication to see how the market will adjust and will allocate resources accordingly. I mean, we saw it with AYR's restructuring. We saw it with cannabis restructuring. And a lot of good things can come out of it if a company emerges that is sustainably capitalized for growth and development.
Well, it'd be interesting to see, obviously, how this has been progressed. But do you think this signals at all, like any financial distress in the industry? Are there any specific factors at play here that people should be paying attention to?
It's certainly a reflection of some of the weakness in some of those markets that has developed over the last two years.
Yeah.
But I think this is a reflection of the trends that have been going on for those 2 years, not of something that's happened in the last 2 quarters.
Yeah. And I think in this side of the industry, whatever decisions that you're making now, you can see that reflection 12, 24 months on your earnings that is appearing to run into issues with IIPR right now. But be interesting to see, as I said, how this is going to unfold. But it's also great to see some of the cannabis benchmarks that you just outlined, highlighting some of the states that are actually doing well, which is welcoming news, considering the fact that everybody looks at the industry right now and looks at it as flat. And it's almost degressing versus progressing, which I, definitely disagree with. But the capital markets don't lie right now. But all in all, strong latest earnings that you just reported, and appreciate, obviously, you checking in and providing us a little bit of dialogue and feedback on what we should be paying attention to for the industry as a whole.
Thanks for having me. Love these conversations.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Let's keep in touch.
Likewise.
All right. Thanks. You back, Anthony? Oh, I think he's froze. High Tide remains the highest revenue generating cannabis company reporting in Canadian dollars, delivers quarterly revenue of $142.5 million, an all-time record. This represents an increase of 11%. Thank you, Phil, for outlining that. Another banger quarter for High Tide. I think we're seeing another froze on Anthony, but we'll get him on eventually. But we've reached out to Raj and the team. I don't know when they're going to be available, but hopefully we get him on relatively soon to talk about the latest earnings. Tony, thank you. SNDL tomorrow mornings, earnings release before the bell. That'll be interesting to see on how that progresses. I'm sure there'll be a few questions asked pertaining to last week's news on that investor call. But with that wraps up Into the Wire. You there, my friend?
Dude, my internet was just going nuts. I couldn't hear the last 5 minutes of the Peter interview, and I was just trying to figure out what the hell is going on. But
it's all good. We're back. Showtime, baby. We're back Into the Wire. That wraps things up. Let's now head on over to segment number 2. Let's go, Arns. All right, it's time for Insider's Edge, our friendly little Monday afternoon segment. Let's welcome in Michael Bronstein back to the podcast. He is the president of the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp. Good day, sir. How do you like us kind of learning on the fly here?
No, it's all good.
Yeah, this is
the fun thing about living in the future is that nothing works.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm about to get Starlink. Starlink that just gets connected to my computer in my house.
Yes.
And just that's that.
Well, there's a famous clip on YouTube that went live with Bill O'Reilly when he was at a current affair, and he was just, F it, we'll do it live. And that's what we are right now. But good to see you. How was your week?
The man was game time, and so am I. No, the week was good. A lot of stuff going on, obviously in the industry. And I'll just say that, with what we've been watching, I think that there's never really a dull moment, quite frankly. We could use a little bit more dull moments. I was listening to Peter earlier, and he just said, we just have a boring regular investment vehicle. And to me, that sounded, that sounded like a good place to start.
Raging gun. You bet. I was laughing inside when you said, tell Peter to calm down. But that's just the way he is.
They make
slow and steady, man. And honestly, boring is actually a cool thing in the cannabis industry, is it not?
No, it was great. And, it was great to see Peter on. I'm glad that you had him. And it was great to hear about his market insight.
Yeah, he may be, just very monotone, but I'll tell you, man, when you go to MJ Biz, his company and his firm, they put on the best parties. So don't judge a book.
I saw you there, I believe.
We saw each other there, right?
Saw each other there.
Yeah. All right, let's begin. News from last week in Pennsylvania, where the state Senate held a key hearing on March the 12th to discuss the legalization of adult use cannabis, as we continue to talk about. So the hearing revealed growing bipartisan support, with some Republican senators signaling openness to the idea and provided strict regulations are in place. So on that, what are you seeing, hearing? Are we gaining momentum? Because it sounds a little promising here.
Yeah. This conversation is definitely active in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And I think that we're going to continue to see movement. The legislature was back in today. We're waiting on a special election where we're likely to see a Democratic majority in the House return. So right now there's a split. We're awaiting a special election on Tuesday of next week. Nobody really anticipates the seat changing parties.
Okay.
So it would just mean that voting could start to happen. I think that we'll likely start seeing the House take up legislation on legalization in Pennsylvania. And
that's great.
Yeah. So I think that there will be a start. And, one of the larger issues I think that they're going to have to get over on the House side is there's going to probably be a discussion on a state store model. Not that will be, we've talked about this a lot here before, not that will be a model that gets passed or gets put in place. But I do anticipate that over these coming weeks, there will be discussion. There will be discussion around that. And then I think there will also be discussion about what an actual regulatory model looks like in Pennsylvania as well, which is what Pennsylvania is going to be moving towards. So
all promising things. These are good problems to have, because now we're at the table, we're discussing, and it's like the framework is becoming more and more of a reality, right?
I think so. And when we were watching the budget hearings, and I was there, the budget hearings, to me, there was so much more about cannabis discussed in the budget hearing. Some folks are saying, oh, this is like the same old, but it's just not. When you watch the hearings. So, Governor Shapiro brought it up, but then you started really hearing a lot of specificity about what the program would look like when people were questioned. The Secretary of Agriculture had a lot to say about it because under the governor's proposal, it would be the Department of Agriculture that would regulate cannabis production in Pennsylvania. This conversation is moving. And there's going to be, I think that this is going to be a very large story, certainly in the cannabis industry over the next couple of weeks and over the next several months as we approach this June budget deadline, this June 30th budget deadline. So there's a lot.
That's the date that you got to keep in mind, obviously, June the 30th. But, I think sometimes you got to put things into perspective. It's kind of nice to see a governor of a state that could be a major state player for adult use cannabis constantly tweeting about this every single week. That's a great thing. And I know a lot of people's perception is like, is this real or not? Because that's just not the state of Pennsylvania. That's the industry as a whole, because we have faced so many losses time and time again. But all sounds promising. And everyone we talk to, and I know you've got your ear to the ground closer to anybody regarding this story, it sounds very promising that we will get something passed at some point this year. Do you still agree with that?
Yeah, I think this year is the year, knock on wood. And the reason why we're targeting the June 30th budget deadline this year is because the governor had mentioned it in the budget address, and there very well could be a negotiation around the budget table on cannabis legalization. And again, I think it's one of two topics that really could get revenue in Pennsylvania. And so we've seen a lot of skirmishes during the hearing talking about, well, how much is that revenue going to be? How is that revenue going to be taken in, right? Those are really good conversations to have. Those are conversations meaning we're moving more towards legalization. And the Pennsylvania legislature is a full-time legislature. This isn't like Texas where June 30th hits and then, everything turns into a pumpkin, and see you next session. Right.
Really?
I should say a hemp-infused pumpkin.
Kind of like lobbying, right? And reform. Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like that.
You had mentioned state-run cannabis stores. Is that just going to be thrown out there to use as like a bargaining chip? And we'll hear some rhetoric around that, but that's really not in the realm of possibility for what gets passed ultimately.
I don't think it is in the realm of possibility in terms of final passage, because it would have to make its way through a Republican Senate. And there's absolutely no way that a Republican Senate would legalize cannabis through a state store system. So just like, to give the insider's edge here on this, the
I like
Pennsylvania, I'm bringing it. Pennsylvania, okay? The discussion around the state liquor store in Pennsylvania owns a state liquor store. Wine and spirits are sold through Pennsylvania liquor store.
Okay.
The reason why Pennsylvania's liquor stores have not been privatized has a lot to do with politics in the state. Republicans want to privatize them because the state stores a lot of them are unionized and union workers. So it's actually, when you hear about the state store issue in Pennsylvania, which has derailed more budgets than anybody wants to count over the last, 20 years or so, right? With people trying to deal with the state stores, a lot of the times it's really a war by proxy, that conversation, and the state gets a lot of revenue from having state stores in terms of alcohol. Yeah. So,
well, I'm just reading right now news. There was a new report released on March 15th by the Pennsylvania Cannabis Coalition, estimates that legalizing adult use cannabis could generate over $500 million in annual tax revenue for the state. That's huge. So some concerns still about safety and youth access. That you get that in any state, that's always their concerns. But $500 million. That's a huge talking point to get this passed, I would think, for many people involved. And what a welcoming news that would be, I would think. Yes.
Yeah. And the governor is talking about all the other states that are around Pennsylvania. The fact that it's time to legalize. If you look at the Twitter video that he posted, that's actually filmed right in the governor's mansion. He's answering the questions, and he's like walking around. He's like walking around the mansion. That wasn't just anywhere that those questions were answered. He literally was. I was looking at it, and it was literally filmed, right there as he was answering some questions about it. So I think that it's really good that he's answering those questions and talking about the issue, and also as he's talking about other issues that could impact the budget. So to my way of thinking, last year we saw we just basically saw him speak about it. We didn't really see social media presence. We didn't see campaigning around it. We didn't see any of those types of things. This year we are seeing those types of things, and we're also seeing a substantive proposal being talked about in the legislature. Okay, so that's a marked difference. People who are involved in politics read those things differently than people who might be outside of politics, and maybe they're just in the cannabis industry, or saying, well, we've heard some of this stuff before, and haven't I heard people speak about X piece of legislation before, and where it's going to go. So like it's to me, this discussion is different, and this is going to be a very critical couple of weeks here.
What else is on your plate right now? I know that you're deep in Pennsylvania, from a state perspective. What else are you focused on right now? What's moving the needle for you outside of PA?
There's a bunch of legislation that's popping around the states in terms of hemp regulation on the marketplace. We're testifying today in Florida on a bill which is looking to help regulate some of the intoxicants that we're seeing on the market, like the synthetic THC products, and also looking at restrictions around some of those products. We'll be testifying this week I believe we'll also be in Arkansas. There's a bill that's up. We've been providing testimony in a number of different states on these bills from a regulatory perspective. So there's a lot of stuff going on. We're continuing to watch Texas very closely in terms of those regulations. California, there's been some discussion, especially after the governor's executive order and what that means in California. And we saw bills pop up in Missouri. It's pretty big. I mean, attach. We do do a lot of state work. And we have a state council of national organizations that's comprised of 20 different state level organizations. So where we can help out in setting policy, we believe a lot of the policy that happens federally is set up by the states. And we've done a really good job of helping organize the industry at the state level in order to help advance legalization and common sense regulation.
Regarding Texas, now that it unanimously passed the Senate committee, should we start to see that SB3 move through the state legislature at an expedited pace? And I mean, is there any certain expectation as to where that lands? I'm sure it's going to get wrapped up in litigation if in the event that it does pass.
Yeah, I do suspect that what we are going to see is discussion around what that bill should look like on the House side. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's like a discussion to be had amongst all the interested parties about what makes sense from a Texas perspective. And it's just pretty clear. I think a lot of people were taken aback by the fact that just basically that bill passed, mm-hmm. and how restrictive that bill was. And I keep saying this, and I don't know why, people should listen, right? Like if politicians are fooled about what is being sold in the market, right? They don't know. You're going to start to see reactions like you're seeing in these different states. Okay.
Correct.
We're seeing that federally too.
Yeah.
Okay. Because really what it is it's a public trust. It's a public trust too between, what folks in the legislature think is okay, what the general public think is okay, and also what industry thinks is okay. And so I would say if you look at legislation across the country, we're seeing more restrictive legislation, not less restrictive, right? Like there's sort of this thesis out there that's like, okay, hemp is, hemp is legal, and also people are saying it's regulated. But then when you really drill down on the state level, like what happened in the Farm Bill or what people are saying happened in the Farm Bill leaves a lot to be desired. Certainly at the state level, and a lot of things that people didn't bargain for, especially with the synthetic THC products.
But do you think but do you think that these bills that are coming down in an onerous way are a repercussion of we took the hemp industry and it went all the way to the extreme that it's in right now with these synthetics, derivatives? I mean, you see California flower from the traditional market being put with fake COAs that you can just order straight to your door. Like they took something that could have been fully functioning and optimized on a go-forward basis, and just it's now a Frankenstein industry of just anything goes for the most part. Because I know that I have a pretty strong opinion on the hemp industry, but there's a lot of good operators within the hemp industry. There's a lot of good products within the hemp industry, but there's a hell of a lot of bad ones, and the good ones are not holding those operators accountable. It's kind of like everyone's just got their hands out, making as much money as possible until the feds come in and just do something. And as it is right now, they're not doing anything for the most part.
Yeah. And look, we have a lot of, obviously we represent, cannabis and hemp. And Attach started out, working on the original Farm Bill, and also, helping bring cultivars into the U.S. to help regrow this industry. And one of the things that has been really problematic is that this derivative industry that's popped up, nobody cares. All right. When they're a legislator, when they're law enforcement, right? Those products are really problematic, right? We want to see natural THC. We want to see natural THC legal, right? We want to see natural THC regulated, right? We want people to have access.
Do you think that's the product? Do you think that's the most ideal roadmap that's going to happen? Because like the cat's out of the bag, and I know there's a lot of concerns that people have towards this hemp industry, but let's be realistic on how politicians work. Like, do you see? Go ahead.
The biggest problem with the hemp industry is the proliferation of THCA flower. If the hemp industry was just confined to edibles, vapes, and other form factors, even including drinks, I don't think it would be a problem. The problem is the THCA flower is being abused to high hell by people getting black market product, getting traditional product. And like I said, there also are good operators in the THCA market that are putting cannabinoids in patients' hands in markets such as North Carolina, Texas, other markets that don't have access to the plant, that are acting in good faith and running good businesses that are above board.
Michael, how do you see this all unfolding? Like taking a step back here, like, is this going to be a blanket where it's like the Farm Bill is eventually going to get retweaked and a lot of this stuff will go away? Or is this going to be basically on a state per state basis that you're seeing more and more of some of these hemp bills that are starting to come to fruition?
I think there are a couple different stages to this. Right now, we're definitely in the state by state stage where kind of the first shots that were fired in this debate were done, out west in court on a case that really did not have much to do with the regulation of the industry. Okay. And the idea that states weren't able to regulate these products is a fiction. And I think that we saw that in the Fourth Circuit. So now once that ruling happened, it's interesting because you don't really hear people talk about that ruling as much as you thought they would after it happened, right? We heard a lot about the first ruling, then that ruling came out, and then all of a sudden everybody on the other side of the issue kind of was quiet. And they just, folks are doing what they're doing, on this. But I think that states started feeling more comfortable about regulating the way that they want to regulate, right? So if they've set up, quote unquote, adult use hemp programs that follow, natural products, that's a lot different than setting up programs where they don't know what they're selling and they're selling all these synthetic products. And I think that what we've seen is at the state level, there's been a lot of experimentation. So maybe they started out with that. Okay. And then all of a sudden they started dialing it back. Okay. Because they don't understand the facets of it. We still go into legislatures now. And like, people don't know, like I talked to a legislator like just this week and they're like, we didn't know that hemp was intoxicating. Right?
I agree with you. And I mean, Brady, I forget if it was on the recording or if it was in the conversation we were having off camera, but Brady was saying that there is actually a lawmaker or a state senator in the Florida legislature whose office is on the first floor in the state capitol building. And what she has done is she has constructed an exhibit of hemp products that she's been able to buy within the Tallahassee area, and it reeks of cannabis. And what she does is educate people as this is non-regulated THCA flower and hemp that you can go buy at smoke shops, gas stations, etc. And that's how she's educating people on what's going on. But I mean, looking at things like Texas is a $3 billion hemp market. I don't see any way, shape, or form of how they are going to put that genie back in the bottle or regulate it. You're talking about putting people out of work and like greatly impacting people's lives. Not even that they won't have access to the plant. That's a lot of just money that's flowing through the Texas economy and putting money in people's pockets. Like that state just needs to bring on a medical hemp program and say, here's a license, here's a license, here's a license. Let's legitimize this, tax it, and put standards to it and move forward, because a $3 billion genie is never going back in the bottle.
Yeah.
Well, you look at that, but you also look at like Congress, and I've had these conversations around it. So like in Texas, you have like what I think you're seeing backlash, right? Yeah. On the Texas side, they didn't know about it, right? They see about the proliferation, of some of these products. Okay. And now you have a bill that really is, is really restrictive. Okay.
It's totalitarian.
So I think that you've got to like take a look at what's going on. And you're right. It's like, okay, they're good actors. They're bad actors. Okay. And what we don't see in the industry is accountability.
Correct.
We don't see accountability and we don't see responsibility.
But how can there be accountability when we get a story last week about the DEA being biased towards the rescheduling of cannabis? Like that filters down.
Because the industry.
No. Michael's completely on point here.
I'm saying
is the CEOs that are running the above board hemp businesses need to be policing their own. They need to be deploying dollars into policing their own, holding their own accountable, and making sure that their public image is in line to where they're not attacked, and separate themselves, because those are businesses that deserve to be in business. Like I'll never forget, in 2015, the first time I went to Canada, when I went to Vancouver, I got out the cab on the way to my hotel from the airport. There was a cannabis dispensary called Weeds that was just sitting there in public view, out in the open. You could smell cannabis off the street. I swear to God, my business partner and I get out of the cab. We walk into Weeds, and I see a bunch of police officers walk by and look around, and they said nothing. I turn to him and go, "This is crazy. I can never in my wildest dreams imagine this happening in the United States." It's now in every single major city in the United States
Yeah.
via the form of the hemp industry.
Yeah.
And it's legal cannabis. It really is.
Would you the thing that I think about is like, would you be okay with giving one of these products to your friend? Right? Would
No.
you be okay with, that's just the answer, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, we have to be in a, like, I don't care. I'll give you a beer, right? I know it's safe. You know what I mean? Like, there has to be the safety of the actual product. Okay. And like, when we say calling people out, I refuse to believe that we're not a part of the solution. We as an industry are not part of our own solution. If we're just like, oh, everybody is like on the, everybody's okay here, right? Then we won't really get to the spot where we need to get to. And we're going to wind up being over-regulated. All right. Because people won't be trusting of what it is. And some of the self-regulatory things that I've seen in market, like they stop short of the synthetic stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
They stop short of like, because they're like, you know what? We got to make everybody happy, right? Now's not the time to make everybody happy. All right. Now is the time to figure out who the good actors are. All right. Come together. All right. And we've got a number of good actors in our association. And by the way, like, code of conduct. Okay. Like, what could the products have? What can't they have in them? All right. And really be honest. Really be honest.
These are hemp gummies. These are hemp gummies that are naturally derived Delta-9 THC. I scan the QR code on the back. It brings me to their site. I've got a COA right here for the batch. This is a product I would give my friend 100%. This is a product I would put in, obviously I would put in my body 100%. That is the few in the industry right now.
And there are a few, and there are people who are very concerned about.
Yeah, I was going to say, what are they saying? As people that are involved in the hemp industry that are doing things right, that are doing it legalized. Like, I assume they have the same takes that a lot of cannabis companies have right now.
So if you notice, and I'll let you go right in a second, Mike, but if you notice, none of the MSOs, none of the big companies have got into THCA flower. They've gotten into edibles, they've gotten into drinks, and they've gotten into other products that can have COAs on them that have trust built into them within the market. Because the thing that's the most untrustworthy is the THCA flower, because there's no real testing standards for the most part, and God knows what's in there. I wouldn't ingest it, and like Michael had said, he nailed it. I wouldn't give it to my friend.
That's just good.
That's the true test, right? When we've normalized cannabis, because here's the thing, we're trying to legalize natural THC.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like how many people got into this where they're like, actually, like, we need to legalize HHC and THCP, and OPP and me, like, what are we trying to legalize here?
It's
right.
ridiculous.
Like, that's the thing, right? Like, what did we get into? But here's the thing. We have this conversation and there are some corners. Now, granted, you can find anything on the internet, right?
Yeah.
But there's some, including us, but there are some corners of this debate and this discussion where they're like, that's a radical. What we're talking about is radical.
Yeah.
Like, not only is it not radical, it's like what has to happen. And by the way, it's like literally the only logical thing that makes sense that happens. So you ask, well, what happens? Like, it's like, okay, we're going to get to federal regulation.
Yeah.
The Farm Bill discussion, I've never believed that the Farm Bill is about final product because it's not. You can't regulate by final product in the Farm Bill. So people are like, is it a loophole? It's like, yeah, it's designed for, it's being used as something that people are.
So if I'm reading between the lines, is this more about just graduating cannabis to that next level versus slapping the hands of the hemp industry, meaning legalizing THC? Is this where we need to go? Is that the best solution moving forward?
How is legal? The answer is always to legalize marijuana.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Problem is what you just said makes too much common sense.
It's like legalize marijuana. What are we doing?
Yeah.
Right? We're like sitting around and there's so much pent up demand for what it is. And people are using essentially I think that a large portion of these synthetic products, there's a large part of the general public, or these derivative products, there's a large portion of the general public, they don't know that it's not like real marijuana.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
They
Like
don't.
I think a lot of it's being sold with a nod
There's
and a wink.
there's a lot of Americans that don't know this stuff.
And the problem is when you look at the HHC, THCP, all the really strong stuff, that's that 708 shit, grown-ups are not buying that.
Yeah.
Those are younger consumers that are buying that to get whatever level of high that they want to get. It's not the 40-year-old that can't get access to cannabis that just wants to smoke a joint. They're not buying the exotic synthetic nonsense. It's younger kids.
People say, you hear this, right? I agree with you 100%, right? I hear this all the time from lawyers who are like, you know, the Farm Bill regulated that. Farm Bill is regulation, right? And I was talking to a reporter who said that to me last week, like from a major source, right? And I was like, whoa, wait a second. And they're like, oh, the Farm Bill is some type of regulation. I'm like, what are you talking about? It doesn't regulate final product. Okay, where's the age restriction in the Farm Bill? Where's that?
Where is that?
Where is it? Okay, because if they meant to do that, don't you think that they would put an age restriction on it? No, we decided to sell intoxicating products to everybody in the United States. This sounds actually exactly like what Congress would do, right? We're super cool with it. We're so cool with it. We're not going to put an age restriction in there, right? It's cool. Don't worry about it, right? So it's like, and the Farm Bill can't regulate by final product. And let me ask you this: if that was the intent, all right, of the Farm Bill, we all thought that CBD right now, which they did intend.
Yeah.
A lot of us would say they did intend to do that. Okay. Where are the regulations on that?
Correct.
You still can't put that in food. You still can't put that in bed, right? So you're telling me that the Farm Bill is where regulation emanates from? It doesn't. And by the way, it can't. So it would. So basically what you need by jurisdiction, it can't. So you need a Farm Bill plus. Okay. You need to address it in the Farm Bill. Okay. And then you need to have a regulatory system that is attached to it. And I think that ultimately those questions are the questions of legalization. Now we're in these states and people are like, wait a second, what did we do here? Right. And we're making people uncomfortable. I'm okay with making people uncomfortable about this.
We have to.
Who were those representatives back in 2018 that approached Mitch McConnell that eventually got hemp attached to the Farm Bill? That's what we need as far as the next steps when it comes to the cannabis industry.
It was Andy Harris, Mitch McConnell, wasn't Tillis. I forgot who it was, but it was mostly Andy Harris and McConnell.
Yeah. Well, that's the stage we're at right now, because as we know for sure, the ghost of Mitch McConnell lives strong in this space still. That's for sure. And we're still, it's crazy, the stuff that you guys talk about. But listen, you did mention the term OPP. Were you a big Naughty by Nature fan back in the 90s?
Not that I hate you, but yeah. I mean, I won't say I was that big. I was just throwing out lyrics. I mean, I don't know. We're around the scene, you know.
Another one was the pumpkin seed comment. You a pumpkin pie fan, or are you like not liking pumpkin pie?
Somebody put pumpkin pie down there. I'm going to tell you something. Pumpkin anything. It's one of my favorite gourds.
Seriously,
I like squash. I like all that.
Do you like?
I love squash. I hate pumpkin.
Do you like Cool Whip on the pumpkin pie, or is Cool Whip?
Hate pumpkin.
You can eat it.
I do love squash though, in all forms. From a food perspective, I love squash. I absolutely hate pumpkin.
I find that impossible. I mean, there's very few redeeming things about fall.
Pumpkin pie is gross.
I can't do pumpkin pie.
Gross.
Pumpkin pie is great.
Do you call it Cool Whip or like Stewie and the Family Guy? Is it Cool Whip?
No, it's Cool Whip.
Cool Whip.
Yeah,
all right.
It's Cool Whip.
Well, on that note, this is the producer right now. If she was in my ear, she'd be like, wrap it up, you know. But listen, always good to talk to you every single Monday. For any people that have concerns and really want to get out there and get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you again from a lot of the stuff that we just talked about?
info@attach.org. Go to the Attach website. You can hit me there. also on socials.
Great. Always great catching with you. This has been Insider's Edge, presented by the American Trade Association for Cannabis and Hemp with Michael Bronstein. We will see you next Monday. Thank you, sir. Have a great week.
You too. Enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Michael. I think everybody's starting to like that segment more and more. You're on fire there, but I know this
great
is
segment.
Yeah, you understand that inside and out. It's nice just to sit back and learn from you guys, but it's nuts. Like, I just saw it firsthand. 2 stores down. There was a hemp store 2 stores down from where Brady was last week. Like, you were showing me that afterwards, but you did highlight, and by the way, if you scan our QR code, you can learn this kind of information, but you did highlight the newsletter last week. 97% of consumers buy from legal sources up in Canada right now, which I thought was rather interesting. I don't know if you saw that last week, but you, of course you did. You created it within the newsletter, but I thought that was a staggering number. It surprised me, but greatest legacy that Justin Trudeau left behind in a poll by
all you have to tell somebody, and it's very easy about cannabis, is the shit you're buying on the street. I'm not going to tell you that there is pesticides, heavy metals, and things that will actually harm you and are carcinogenic in it, but there could be. Here's an alternative. Even if it is a little bit more expensive, it's tested. There's none of those heavy metals, pesticides, etc. in it. What are you going to choose? It's pretty easy.
People just need to be informed more on what they're buying. That's the issue.
Yeah, that's it.
What it is. Coming up Wednesday, Christian Egermeyer from Atai Life Sciences. They just reported their latest earnings actually today. We want to get an idea as to what he thinks of the overall space now that, as we've always said, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is head of the HHS and what it might mean for the overall space for psychedelics moving forward. So Christian Egermeyer is going to be on as well, along with one of the partners from Artemis Growth Partners, very well-connected person on the European side of the cannabis industry, former Wall Street guy. What's Will's last name? I don't have it at the top of my head. Okay. He's going to be joining us on Wednesday as well. So we got that lined up. And then later this week on Friday morning, Charlie Backdale is going to join us from Cresco Labs, talk about his latest numbers. What was it? 720 million in revenue for the year for 2024. So impressive numbers. I do know that.
Raging Gun, I agree with you 100%. If cannabis was able to be sold at farmers markets, I 100% would buy it from people that were growing it in small craft batches. It's probably organic, and it's probably some of the best stuff you can buy. The fact of the matter is I can't. But if I could, that would be my preferred method of purchasing it.
Yeah. Raging Gun also wrote, I'm surprised I haven't been kicked off the channel. I usually get kicked off rather quickly. No, you're good, buddy. Just have a contested argument. I'm all for that. I'm not a big Skip Bayless fan, but it's always good to have someone from a different perspective. So all good, my friend. Just keep it within certain boundaries. Don't be throwing any F-bombs or stuff like that or any attacks, but all is well. Did you see the, I think you froze earlier when I talked or quickly highlighted latest numbers for High Tide. They had a record quarter again.
I haven't seen them yet. I think the stock was down though. It looked like
said it was getting messy after markets. But okay, so Will and Christian up on Wednesday, and then Christian Egermeyer is going to be joining us this Friday. Or excuse me, Charlie Backdale will be joining us this Friday from Cresco Labs to talk about the latest earnings. So good little week of guests coming up. In the meantime, as I said before, like, subscribe, share this video with your network. Scan that QR code if you want to get analysis and some of the latest updates and what we just talked about with Michael. By scanning this QR code and becoming a baked-in newsletter subscriber delivered to your inbox weekdays, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern time. AV, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you back here Wednesday.
See you Wednesday.
Now, that was a good one. What'd you guys all think? Did you like what we had to say here today? Do you agree, disagree with what we're saying? Love to get your feedback. As usual, leave comments below. Trade to Black is growing, and we wouldn't have done it without you. So if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check us out on Apple and Spotify for the audio version. And as usual, leave lots of comments. We, as I said, love to hear back from you. Thanks again, everybody, for watching.